is was a future mayor of Calbayog City, a future Secretary General of the League of Cities of the Philippines, and Regional Development Council Chairman for Region 8. He is the new vice chairperson of the Appropriations Committee and has authored 37 bills of both national and local importance. Some of these bills include amendments to the 1991 Local Government Code aimed at strengthening local government units. The United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Reduction and the UN Development Program regularly invite him to represent the Philippines in meetings of parliamentarians to network and share information regarding the country's strategies in dealing with hazard. He has been instrumental in drafting the Incheon resolution last year with 16 other lawmakers. The resolution is a call for legislators to make disaster risk reduction integral to pertinent pieces of legislation. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have paper from Honorable Representative Nel Senen Sarmiento. Unfortunately, he will not be able to come personally, so he has sent his representative, Mr. Jeremy Philip T. Nishimori. He prefers to be called Nishi. He's the officer in charge, executive director of the League of Cities of the Philippines. We'll be discussing best practices in climate change adaptation. Our second speaker, who is not yet around, but he'll be coming soon, is currently Dean of the Ateneo School of Government, taking his position in 2006 when he returned to the Philippines after an 8-year stint in Washington, D.C. environmental think tank, the World Resources Institute, WRI. From 1996 to 1998, he was the Undersecretary for Environment and Natural Resources of the Philippines. He is co-founder of the Legal Rights and Natural Resources Center, Friends of the Earth Philippines. He is a lead negotiator for the Philippines in the climate change negotiations. He played prominent and leadership roles in Kyoto in 1997 as the chair of the land use change and forestry negotiations, and in Copenhagen in 2009, where he chaired the Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Degradation, also known as REDD+, negotiations. In the Durban Climate Change Conference in December 2011, our speaker again chaired REDD+ negotiations and succeeded in getting 125 countries to an agreement on REDD+ finance, which has been characterized as the maximum, not least common denominator. Our second speaker is Dr. Antonio Lavilla, who is going to talk about issues, problems, and challenges related to climate change governance in the Philippines, a policy science approach. Our third speaker is a program coordinator of advocacy, campaigns, and communication of Oxfam. She has more than a decade of working with various non-governmental organizations on issues on women's rights, reproductive health, trade and climate change. She's none other than Ms. Kalayaan Pulido Constantino, who is going to talk about adaptation financing. There's a little bit of change in her presentation. Okay, so our fourth speaker for our session until 3 o'clock is from the Climate Change Commission. She is the Division Chief of Information and Knowledge Management. She has been with the Climate Change Commission since 2009. Before joining the Commission, she served as Director of the Center for Social Policy in the Ateneo School of Government at the Ateneo de Manila University, and has led various projects in partnership with civil society groups and academia, focusing on sustainable development issues such as biosafety, access rights in environmental decision-making, transparency and accountability, and climate change. She holds a master's degree on politics of sustainable development in Keele University, UK. Our fourth speaker is Ms. Lorraine Gatlabayan. She's going to give us a audiovisual presentation and discuss the essence of essential points of that audiovisual presentation. So, without further ado, may I now call on our first speaker, Mr. Jeremy Philip Nishimori, to read the paper of Congressman Nelson Nieto.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Magandang hapon po sa inyo lahat. Before I jump into the speech, let me just say it's an honor to represent Congressman Sarmiento. As mentioned earlier, he was the Secretary General of the League of Cities of the Philippines. It's probably why local governments are so close to his heart in terms of his advocacies. I guess indirectly, I'm also representing the League of Cities here, since many of the advocacies, in particular with on climate resilience and disaster resilience, it seems that our leadership, namely Mayor Oscar Rodriguez of San Fernando, Pampanga, and Mayor Hernani Braganza of Alaminos City, Pangasinan, they share many of the perspectives of Congressman Sarmiento. Now, whether it's because Kong Sarmiento used to be the mayor of Calbayo, it's because both of my principals now were also former members of the House. There must be a connection there somewhere, but definitely the advocacy is shared. So, to the paper by Congressman Mel Senen Sarmiento. Good afternoon. I have originally saved this date to attend this NCPAG International Conference. This would have been an opportune time to discuss with experts in the realm of public administration, including notable members of the academe, issues that continue to pose challenges to the country. An equally important meeting in Geneva, however, obligated me to leave the privilege of meeting you. The United Nations International Strategies in Disaster Reduction appointed me to be the parliamentarian representative of the Philippines in a circle of lawmakers all over the world to discuss policies on DRR. Upon receiving the note of appointment, I had to assure my colleagues at the House of Representatives that this would not in any way affect my legislative work. May I therefore ask your indulgence, as I have opted to integrate our topic in Geneva to the subject given to me by NCPAG, which is best practices in climate change adaptation. We are to discuss the post-Hyogo Framework for Action scenario in Geneva. The Hyogo Framework for Action, 2005 to 2015, was envisaged as a blueprint adopted by all member states of the UN General Assembly to guide efforts in the area of disaster risk reduction. Since its adoption, the 3 strategic goals in the 5 priority areas contained within the HFA have since become a common point of reference for states to systematically track progress in disaster risk reduction efforts that they have undertaken. As it expires in 2015, coinciding with the deadline of the Millennium Development Goals, the questions are, what did we as a country gain from this? What needs fixing? And what's next? Evidently, disaster risk reduction has gained momentum on the global scene as well as in many countries driven by increasingly apparent trends in economic risks and losses incurred by disasters. The disasters may have become more frequent and severe, but the strides made by government are not to be ignored. The UNISDR deserves to be commended for creating opportunities for governments through their parliamentarians to engage in constant discussions in shaping their respective DRR and climate change action plans. Indeed, through the UNISDR, I had the chance to gather 16 of my colleagues in Incheon to increase their awareness in matters relating to DRR and climate change. Though 16 seems to be dwarfed by the 285 members of the Philippine legislature, the 285 members that the Philippine legislature has, we were able to give flesh to the Incheon resolution we promulgated during the week-long training. The Incheon resolution serves as our commitment and guide in the conduct of our mandates as lawmakers, in coordination with Philippine government agencies tasked to implement national laws on DRR and climate change, we are at the forefront in ensuring that the national budget places premium on DRR and climate change programs. Exercising our oversight function in the implementation of DRR and climate change laws, the group proposed amendments to the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund, making it more local government friendly. With our proposal, local governments should now be able to utilize portions of their Disaster Risk Reduction Fund in preparation for disasters, and even for paying for premiums incurred by local governments in funding pre-disaster projects. This will concretize the paradigm shift from mere response to preparedness. The group also rallied behind the passage of the People's Survival Fund, which is basically an amendment to the Climate Change Act with the PSF. The source of funds for climate change programs are now more clearly identified. As experience with both disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation grows, there is increasing recognition that these two fields share a common focus: reducing the vulnerability of communities and contributing to sustainable development. The high level of climate-related risks in Asia make DRR and CCA key policy goals. Climate change poses a threat to the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals. The recent Global Assessment Report on Disaster Risk Reduction shows that mortality and economic loss are heavily concentrated in developing countries and disproportionately affect those living in poverty. In the Pacific, as elsewhere, global climate change and disasters have their greatest impact at the local level. Studies show that the accumulated impacts of small and medium disasters may be equivalent to or exceed those of large disasters. Increases in the frequency of these lower intensity hazards have a major impact on poverty. The effects of climate change are magnifying the risks of disasters. These will place additional burdens on humanitarian and development systems at all levels. Climate change, including an increase in extreme weather and climate events, poses a threat to food security through erratic rainfall patterns and decreasing crop yields. Furthermore, adverse climate change impacts on natural systems and resources, infrastructure and labor productivity may lead to reduced economic growth and increasing poverty. These effects threaten the achievement of MDG 1, which is to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. Loss of livelihood and assets, displacement and migration may lead to reduced access to education opportunities, thus hampering the realization of MDG 2. The depletion of natural resources and decreasing agricultural productivity may place additional burdens on women's health. The reduced time for decision-making processes and income-generating activities and the resultant negative effects on gender equality and women's empowerment will impact MDG 3. Increased incidence of vector-borne diseases, heat-related mortality, and declining quantity and quality of drinking water will lead to adverse health effects, thus threatening the achievement of MDGs 4, 5, 6, and 7. In general terms, the realization of MDG 7 may be jeopardized through climate change negatively impacting on the quality and productivity of natural resources and ecosystems, possibly irreversibly. Climate change, a global phenomenon, calls for the collective response in the form of global partnerships as stipulated in MDG 8.